Hi, I'm Richard Stengel, and I'm delighted to be addressing the Daily Mavericks gathering. I had the great privilege of working with Nelson Mandela on his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. Later, I became the editor of Time magazine and an Undersecretary of State for Barack Obama. On December 1st, Audible is releasing Mandela, The Lost Tapes, an original 10-part podcast using the 60 hours of interviews we did for Long Walk to Freedom. Almost no one has ever heard those tapes. And on those tapes, you will hear him as you've never heard him before. He's informal, he's funny, he's thoughtful, he's even wistful. He does people's voices, including his warders and the stuffy English teachers he had at boarding school. Once I asked him about his exercise regimen in prison, and then you will hear him say, "Let me show you." And he gets on the floor and does 2 fingertip press-ups. He tells me about a woman who sent him a telegram after he was released from prison saying she was very happy he was free, but his speech at the Grand Parade in Cape Town was very boring. Then you hear a great Mandela belly laugh. But never once in those 70 hours of tapes does he take his eye off his great and abiding goal, freedom for his people and all South Africans. I've never known anyone so focused. He had the strongest filter of anyone I've ever known. To him, everything, and I mean everything, was subservient to the freedom struggle. The struggle was his life. At times on the tapes, you get a sense of what it was like to negotiate with Nelson Mandela. He tells the story of when he witnessed an assault on Robben Island and then confronts the head of the South African prison system and says, "This is wrong. I have seen it. What are you going to do about it?" There aren't many sentences that crystallize Nelson Mandela better than that. "This is wrong. I have seen it. What are you going to do about it?" That is who he was as a leader. He was a pragmatist, but he was also a moral leader. He talked a lot about the qualities he admires in leaders. Above all, being measured, self-control, maturity. He also talked about the qualities he didn't like in leaders, being too emotional, hot-headed, impetuous, not being a person of your word. He said the one quality that all leaders had in common is the willingness to step up and lead. It's that simple. I once said to him, "One of the most common criticisms of you is that you're too trusting." You know what he said? He said, "Maybe that's right." You know how rare it is for a politician to admit a flaw? But ultimately, I don't think he really saw it as a flaw. He went on to say something profound. The only way you can trust someone is to trust them. He said, how do you negotiate with someone and not take him at his word? So yes, he sometimes trusted people and he was sometimes betrayed. But he would say it was worth it in the quest for freedom. Now, I didn't originally come to South Africa to work with Nelson Mandela. I originally came in 1986 as a journalist. South Africa was then ruled by a minority, white, supremacist government. The country was under one of the most repressive and comprehensive systems of racial suppression in the history of the world. 1986 was a time of gigantic social protest in South Africa. People were dying on the front lines of that protest every day. Nelson Mandela was still behind bars, with no prospect for freedom. The ANC was a banned organization. In those days, I was often followed by a special branch policeman. One had the overwhelming sense of being in an authoritarian country, a police state. It's hard to explain how different South Africa feels now. For all the problems in South Africa, and there are many, I can't tell you how radically different and better it feels. The air is different in a free country. There's still poverty and injustice and corruption, but South Africa is a democratic country where you can determine your own destiny and deal with your own problems. That's what Nelson Mandela believed in and cared about. But he knew that democracy doesn't solve all of one's problems. In fact, what we've seen since World War II is the difficulties so many countries have had in transitioning from autocracy to democracy. One reason is that in those countries, like South Africa, there's little tradition of democratic norms, of democratic institutions. All of those things take time, a lot of time. Now, democracy is in retreat all around the world. The nonprofit Freedom House says every year for the last 16 years, countries around the world have become less democratic. I'm always loath to talk about another country's politics, even one I love and know as well as South Africa. But I will talk about the power of democracy, the power you have to determine your own destiny, to choose what direction you take. That is what Nelson Mandela believed in. That is what he fought for his entire life. Mandela never lived under a democracy. The first election he ever voted in was when he was 76 and running for president himself. I was with him that day when he voted in Durban for the first time. He looked a little sad. I think he was grieving for all those who never had a chance to vote. And I think he was mindful that this was not the end of his journey, but another beginning. The word democracy comes from the Greek and means the people rule. The first demand of the Freedom Charter is, the people shall govern, ! That is literally the definition of democracy. But Mandela understood something else about democracy, that it's messy. He knew that democracy, as someone once said, is the worst system of government ever invented, except for all the others. To him, the purpose of democratic rule was to lift up all of a country's citizens. The government should do for people what they could not do for themselves, to give them a hand, to allow them to live up to their own aspirations. That's what always motivated him, giving people a voice, allowing them to choose. He believed in consensus because he believed human beings in the aggregate make the best choices. In 1997, Mandela warned that once there was majority rule, many people would go into politics for power and self-enrichment. He was right. He saw that as a problem. But he also knew that it was a problem only democracy could solve. He trusted the people. That's what he fought for. That is wrong. I have seen it. What are you going to do about it? His legacy is powerful. Thank you.